All right. Welcome, everybody, to this week's Fuqua LinkedIn Live. So, my name is Pranav Majumdar, and I am a professor here in operations management and various other areas. Been here for about 19 years. So, when Jennifer posted this session on LinkedIn, it was a real blast from the past, seeing, some of you post and engage with that post from classes in operations strategy, supply chain, healthcare. So great sort of engaging with all of you. And for my current students, hello again. Some of you in the past, we've been on trips to India, China, done some silly things and learned a lot from those contexts. And for those of you on the stream right now who are my classmates, take it easy on me. I know we have been through a lot together, but this is my chance to talk about some of the work I'm doing. Finally, I want to welcome those of you who are prospective students and considering Fuqua. Thank you for considering Fuqua. I know there are a lot of good business schools, but here at Fuqua, we believe in the team aspect of it, which is an important part of working together and doing well for everybody. Before we start, I wanted to thank Jason for handling the LinkedIn Live streaming and all other aspects. And as we go along, please post your questions on the LinkedIn live stream, and Jennifer is going to transmit them to me, and we'll try to get to them as we go along. So, as some of you have noticed, I posted on LinkedIn that after many years of pottering around with it, I finally put the words together and published a book. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today, right? So this is the book. Um, it is a plug, but don't go out and buy the book. If you're here around Fuqua, I'd be glad to give you a copy. It's a book on strategy, and in that sense, it's a passion project where I tried to put together everything that I see connected to strategy, not just business strategy, but any other kind of strategy. So let's begin by talking about what this cover means. So you see this? It has two different kinds of swords. One is a battle sword, which is actually hopefully used to be used in battle. I don't think people use that very much nowadays. And the other is a fencing saber, where it is, of course, an Olympic sport and people fight, but it's sort of an artistic representation of what used to be a pretty brutal kind of, fighting, if you wish. So when I look at competition and strategy, this is an important distinction. Are we like literally in a death match, or are we in a stylized competition where we declare winners, but you can come back tomorrow and still continue the next sort of engagement, right? And the image behind it, um, it's sort of a sign to those of my friends who are interested in sort of math and chaos and fractals. There's a story behind that. There was this gentleman, his name is Benoit Mandelbrot. And in the early 70s, he said that I'm going to study commodity prices and price movements in the Chicago Exchange. And he found that it's really difficult to fit that into any statistical profile. And so he explored that. And from that, he came up with the concept of the entire math of fractals. Nobody in those days was interested, but today it has wide applications everywhere. And since that comes from a commodity market, which is also, in a sense, sort of an area where people are competing, you're trying to make money, which is an intensely competitive activity. I think that's relevant to the study of strategy as well. So let me tell you one thing. Obviously, I'm in a privileged position. I'm really thankful to be here at Fuqua, which gives me the opportunity to listen to all my colleagues when they talk about their work, to see wonderful presentations from industry leaders and all that. And so, from where I stand, I look at strategy and I see strategy everywhere. And there's a lot of commonality in strategy. And my purpose here is to illustrate, I don't want to get overly sentimental, but I see strategy as being beautiful. It is something which has a lot of inherent structure to it. And so I'm not going to be talking about something new per se. Everything that I am going to be talking about, others have researched it, others have mentioned it. My purpose here is to really broaden the scope of how we think about business strategy and to put it in a logical framework. And by a logical, rational framework, I mean that you begin with definitions and then you build up from that as to what is it that you're talking about. Otherwise, we talk around in circles. So that's the book. The book is obviously, it's a heavy read. It requires some time and effort. And my purpose here over the next few minutes or so is to illustrate how you can approach these concepts. And I would love to start a discussion with some of you about the concepts in this book. I've been posting excerpts from the book on LinkedIn. Go take a look at that. If that's something that resonates with you, let's have a conversation. So now, before I go in, obviously, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of different things. I love biology, I love chemistry, I love a bunch of different things. That's what I've loved as I grew up. And then in recent years, I'm 52 now, um, with engaging with the community, understanding how to nurture a community, which I'm terrible at, but my wife and other people in the community are better. So seeing them work about it, I'm going to talk about a bunch of those things, but I want you to remember that everything I talk about is about business. So um, let us simplify this idea of competition, right? Let's take two entities who are in some kind of environment. Maybe it's two startups who are, in the cloud space or something like that. Or it could even be, two coffee shops trying to open physical stores in a town. I know it seems like that's never going to happen now, but no, things will get better, and we will have coffee shops that we can go to and engage and all that kind of stuff. So when you're competing in that kind of a sense, life in a competitive environment is pretty brutal, right? Today you might get a whole bunch of customers, and tomorrow, you fall out of favor, and then you have a long lean period. So if you want to sort of do the analogy in the animal kingdom, if you're a wolf and you're searching for prey, you go through real long lean periods, maybe a week or two, where you get almost nothing. And then one fine morning, you might get a big prey, which is more than what you can consume, right? So if you look at this for multiple such lone entities trying to compete with each other, they every day face the the prospect of um, death, shall we say. And so that's a difficult situation. And if we look at this kind of environment, it's very natural to think about getting together and saying that, okay, on a given day, whatever I get, I'm going to share with everybody, which also means that on a given day, whatever somebody else gets, I get a share of that, right? So it's the issue of competition and cooperation. And this basic choice to cooperate is what creates organizations or aggregations. So if you think about it really, in ancient Greece, there was this concept of Achilles' choice as to whether you want to sort of go alone and sort of lead a short but glorious, eventful life, or whether you want to you want to live a long and uneventful life. And every time, if you're thinking of being an entrepreneur, even if you're reasonably successful, you get to a point where you have to decide whether you want to join together or whether you still want to go alone. So that's the basic idea. When we create organizations of this kind of cooperating entities, it has a boundary. You're either inside it or you're outside. Inside, there are members, and there are rules which govern this membership. So initially the rules are norms, but over time, those rules get actually physically written down. And as we write down more of these rules governing what we can do, what we cannot do within the organization, that is what defines the operational strategy and later terms. So if you think about it, some individuals together have created an organization. But really, that's not the only organization. Any organization cannot sort of be infinitely large. So now you have other organizations. And so when you're thinking about competition, in the earlier point, we were thinking about two members, two individuals competing. But now you get to the next level where you have organizations competing. And then if you change your framework, these organizations are just like two individuals competing, and there are many of them, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the structure of the world, we are humans, but humans belong to this whole idea of multicellular organizations where all of our cells cooperate. But we are also members of larger organizations. It might be our community church, it might be an organization, it could be a professional group, it could be, you're part of Fuqua and Duke. And Duke is, of course, competing, Fuqua is competing with other business schools, and Duke is competing with other universities, and so on. So if you look at that, there is strategy everywhere. Now, simply because we are within an organization doesn't mean that, yes, there's a degree of equality. We sort of are all in it together, but we still need a hierarchy. We still need to figure out who gets to take the first piece out of any win, right? So we still need competitions. And this is where we should distinguish between out of system competition, where you meet somebody, you are not cooperating with them. That is really brutal. You could literally get hurt. In system competition, it's all about using real skills, developing them over time. But whatever competition you do, there is the understanding that there shall not be fatalities or death, right? There's no real payoff. At the end of it, you might get a cup, or you might get like $1,000 that doesn't compensate you for the 10 years of your life you spent training. And if you don't win this year, next year you can come back. So if you think about all the tribes we belong to, whether it's NFL teams or college basketball teams, these are in-system competitions where we believe passionately in them, but uh, it's not as if you lose this year, you can't play next year. So these competitions are very important. And if you look at everything that we do around us, if you're thinking about strategy, you have to first ask yourself, am I in an in-system competition or am I in an out-of-system competition? Because that literally determines whether, just run away from the competition. You don't want to risk death or something like that. And so within the organization, within each competition, we have rules. And what are the purpose of rules? It's to define what we are, who we do. But you also have rule breakers. I mean, there's no point writing a rule which is obvious. Like nobody makes a rule saying all humans shall breathe air, because obviously what you're going to do otherwise, right? So when we make a rule, like on the highway, we travel at 65 miles per hour, you have rule breakers. And so what are the types of rule breakers that we could get? And some people don't know they are breaking the rules. Like say, for instance, when I first came to the US from India, I'm sure I broke a bunch of social rules, but people are polite. They don't tell you because they realize you're new. But on the other hand, we have people who know they are breaking rules and still break them. What is the purpose of rules and rule breakers? So if you look at it strategically, once you have an organization strategy, that strategy is set at the moment of creation of the organization. After that, it moves very slowly. So if you think about companies and I don't know, the way they process reimbursements, perhaps. That depends on the business processes that were popular and state of the art when they were formed, maybe in 2001. But it's been 20 years since then. How do you keep up? For an organization, the rule breakers are the way you are aware that, outside they are doing, they are using Square or something like that, much easier way of processing payments and everything. And you gradually try to incorporate that. In the living world, our DNA is set at the time of our birth, but outside there are bacteria and viruses, which are, bacteria sort of have a generation every 30 minutes. They are going to be much more up to it and figure out ways of attacking our body. But the body has to learn that and deploy defenses. So if you look at an organization, it is set in its way from its birth, and you have startups who are competing against that, right? So these are different ways in which there's a continuum of strategy between what we do in business and what goes on in life outside. So that's the purpose of organizational evolution, really. And finally, I'm going to leave you with one thought. What does this mean for business leaders, right? If after being in the system, competing and collaborating with everybody there, you get to be a leader, what are the things that you should keep in mind, right? Number one is that your main job is to ensure the organization survives and continues, accents. Uh, it survives and it continues, right? So survival is obviously about internal and external competition. Continuity is about if people leave, new people join in, how do you ensure that the business continues even with that? And one of the most important things is leadership continuity. What is the organization going to look like when you are not there? How does that transition happen? You, of course, have to nurture those in the organization who follow the rules, who believe in the organization. But here's the important part: you also have to keep an eye out for those who break the rules, those who protest, because that's how you learn that we who take how we operate for granted, this is how we do the business, but there are other ways of doing it. How can we learn? How can we get better without, sticking to the same old way and causing, risks for the organization? So anyway, so that's what this thesis is about. And as I said, I would love to start a conversation with any of you. If you have any questions about this, do continue to post that. Um, the book itself is divided into a front part, part one, which lays out this framework in sort of a structured way. And in part two, which is parables and commandments, we try to look around in business, in biology, in the way nations compete to see how these rules apply and teach us things about them. So for instance, if you take the moonshot, in the late 60s, uh, that is an artistic competition. What do I mean by that? That was the time, it was at the peak of the Cold War, where the USSR and America were competing really in the tools of war, ICBMs, nuclear weapons, and all that. So reaching the moon really there was no functional prize at the end of that. It's not a practical goal in the 60s, but it used the same tools of war and developed much more. So anyway, that's it in terms of the prepared comments. I hope you got a preview of the framework, and as I said, my whole purpose is to see how you might be using this framework and have a discussion with you. So let us take a look at some questions that some of you may have posted. I have a couple of questions that I have prepared as well. So the first question, which I got from one of the posts that I had posted on LinkedIn was, can leaders break any of the rules outside the organization? And obviously, the clear answer to that is no. If we are the leader of an organization, we are still embedded within the nation with its laws and with its rules and norms, really. What are the kind of rules that the leader breaks outside the organization? It's those specific rules which are within the organization. So if you say that the limit for expenses for a dinner is, I don't know, $100 per person, right? That's the rule which applies to everybody within the organization. And I'm just making this up, obviously. But if a leader feels that there is some benefit to breaking this rule outside the organization, when you are going out there and lobbying for something or looking at a customer or a supplier, a leader can break the rules. So if you look at an organization, there's really a hierarchy of which kinds of rules members can break as they get progressively more responsible for things within the organization. Um, all right. Another question which I had seen was, what is the role of consulting companies in this model? Because many of us are going to be joining consulting companies when we graduate from Fuqua. So the way I see it is that uh, if one company or one technology provider has figured out a way of doing something better, right? For instance, blockchain has been in the news for the past 4 or 5 years. Initially, of course, it was, oh, blockchain can solve everything. But now we are figuring out ways to actually use blockchain in, say, perhaps your supply chain transparency and tracking. uh, Many companies have never used blockchain. Suppose you were formed in 1995 or something like that, or even 2005. But I want to include blockchain because it gives me a competitive advantage. So consulting companies help us do that. That is obvious. But in the strategy framework, what is the purpose of that? It is actually to change the company's DNA without causing us to, go out and go bankrupt because we are losing out. And then the new crop of companies in the industry will all be using blockchain or social media or whatever it is. So it's a way of transferring DNA and strategies from one organization to the others. So, in a sense, a consulting company is often a competitive leveler or equalizer across the industry. All right. So these are some of the sort of ideas which come out across the book. Um, in a sense, it's a passion project, as I said. It is something which uh, tries to integrate as much as possible from every kind of area of knowledge that we have. So it is ambitious, and it's easier to talk about it than to read it. So that is basically what I have here. If you have any more questions, do post them. I'd be glad to answer them now or later on. So if you're watching this after the live session, send us an email and we can take it from there. All right, since that's what we have for this session, let me plug next week's session. Now remember, next week it's going to be November 4th, which is somewhat one day after a very momentous event. So Professor Campbell Harvey is going to discuss what the outcome of the US election means for economic and financial institutions and industries. So next week, again at Wednesday at 12:30, do tune in to get some more practical insights from Professor Harvey about the consequences of the election. So thank you all for watching this. Certainly appreciate your time. And I look forward to seeing you in class, in alumni events, and if any of you are prospective students, I'll see you in class. So follow LinkedIn, the Fuqua LinkedIn channel. You'll get to know about these events and others. And thank you very much. And I shall end with live long and prosper.